गुड इवनिंग एंड वेलकम टू गना शॉट. गना शॉट में आप सबका स्वागत है. Today we are going to discuss the principles of war and how have they been applied and what have been the outcomes of these principles in the Iran-USA conflict. And to discuss all this with me is General Hari. Uh, at the outset, welcome Hari back for our weekly discussion on various issues which are, a little hatke from everything else. And we'll discuss this. And how do you think about this? Your opening views on this principles of war business?
Epic Fury was an epic blunder, and as far as if Clausewitz was alive, he would have dug himself into the grave, because what he taught U.S. War College, in fact, that's what comes from Command and Staff College of U.S. War College. And every research paper that comes out, they talk about principles of war, and the way they have flouted it is the result that we are in this muddle where Trump is stuck in this deep sand and he's not able to extricate himself. Not only Trump, everybody. In fact, the whole world is today stuck in that because of the way this current operates. So we can go through with the principles of war. I'm sure most of the people don't know what are the principles of war.
Yeah, that's
Maybe
the thing. Like,
we'll
we'll go through this. Yeah. Look, we learned this that there are 10 principles of war. And let me tell you, at least I learned about these principles of war in 1977. Right? This was in the Indian Military Academy. My battalion commander at that time was then Colonel Shankar Chaudhary, who later became the Chief of Army Staff. And he had a mustache like mine then. And he used to do this and like this and like this. And then discuss these principles of war with us. And we were young boys, and this principles of war, classes used to, when I still remember very vividly, went on for 3-4 days, and he would discuss it with all of us and all that. And he used to talk of selection and maintenance of aim, offensive spirit, concentration of force, surprise, security, maintenance of morale, flexibility, cooperation, economy of effort, and administration. Look, when you're just about 20 years old, when someone talks to you about all this, actually nothing goes into your head, everything goes over your head. But then we learnt it then. We learnt it with the operations which were carried out at that point of time. It demanded us to read a lot of military history. And then over a period of time, as we grew in service, these principles of war acquired a meaning of their own and a life of their own. And we see these principles of war being applied and violated in all wars, all campaigns. And when we discuss this. So that is why I said, look, let's discuss these principles of war in this campaign. We'll go one by one. And, and take it on and see, we'll do it bipartisan manner, both in the case of US and the case of Iran. How did they apply this principle of war? Your opening thing on these 10 principles, and then we'll start with the first one, selection and maintenance of aim. Over to you, Hari.
So beyond what we learned in the IMA, principles of war is also taught in Staff College, the initial part, when we talk about strategy, operational art, and all of them get linked on to this basic structure of what is the basic principles of war. So right from preliminary training to possibly even when we discuss in higher command courses of campaigns, we do campaign studies. The basic principles of war are the bedrock on which any campaign needs to be ridden on. And wherever they go wrong, the blunders start appearing in the campaign studies. And history has got replete examples of some very good examples of successes, and some huge blunders. And I can only say, I can start by saying that I will start with a positive example. And the most positive example I can look at is of Sindhu. Whatever happened between 23rd April to 6th of May, we saw the people who mattered sitting around a round table and having daily discussions. The Prime Minister, the NSA, the three chiefs, the Defense Minister, the Finance Minister, the Minister of External Affairs. All of them sat through, and I'm sure each of these basic principles were very carefully discussed. Because if I was to put a very bright light to Op Sindoor, we laid out an aim. That aim was understood by everybody. We tasked the method by which that aim can be achieved. And having set out the aim, we maintained our line to that aim. And that is reflective on the press release that we put out, the MEA put out on the morning of the 7th of May, post the strikes at the terror camps, that India's aim of this airstrike was to target terror infrastructure inside Pakistan, which was responsible for conducting terror operations in mainland India, primarily in the Pahalgam attack. Having completed our operations, we want to close this chapter there. That was very clearly enunciated. And if the world had listened to it, understood it, what they tried to do 3 days or 4 days later could have well been done by 9 a.m. on 7th morning. And our friend across the border could have been told, hold your horses. And this thing would have ended without even anything going beyond. And that is a very bright example, decent example, which people can understand as to how campaign needs to be identified and how the campaign needs to be structured. So if whatever happened between 23rd April and 6th of May, all those exercises, activities, mobilization, they all fructified into an operation which was launched precisely in midnight of 6th, 7th May last year. And it confirmed to the aim that was selected by the nation. Like Clausewitz says, that any military operation is an extension to the political aim. And here the political aim was very clear. We don't want war, but we will not accept terror. And therefore, we are not targeting any military or civilian infrastructure. We are just targeting known terror bases and the terror nurseries that are coming outside Pakistan, which are responsible for those attacks. And we carried out surgical long-range missile attacks on these 9 plus 2, 11 targets, which was, I think, somehow not understood by the world, that how this is how possibly Clausewitz must have written his way of fighting, conducting wars. So that is why I say we should start by a positive swing. And when you compare it with what happened with Epic Fury, what happened on 28th February was a total different outlook to it.
Yeah, so it was a different outlook. There's no doubt about it. The different thing. So we'll first start with this important thing. Selection and maintenance of aim, because that's what you started with, the positive thing in Ops Indoor. And this is the first thing we've all been taught of: selection and maintenance of aim. So I want your views on why is this probably this is the most important principle of war, the way I look at it. Why is this so important, and how do you relate it to this particular operation, Epic Fury? Back to you.
So when I say selection and maintenance of aim, whenever a military operation is planned, there will be an end state which needs to be identified. That end state indicates as to what do you want to achieve with this operation. And that will dictate what kind of force levels are required, what kind of operations are to be launched, and how the end state has to be achieved with minimum loss of time and effort. So if all that is put together, it constitutes selection and maintenance of aim. When I say selection, you select a correct aim, apportionate the right kind of forces that are required to achieve that aim, and thereafter, while you are carrying out the operations, your focus should continuously be on that particular aim. If you deflect yourself from it, your entire objective of this particular campaign will go awry. And the best example of that, I will leave the Iran war for we'll have a longer discussion. I will go back to the Russian-Ukrainian war. The aim was correctly selected as, liberation of Luhansk and Donetsk regions of Ukraine. That was very clearly enunciated by Russia well before the special military operation was launched. And it was not now. From 2014, Putin and Russians have been saying that these two regions have to be taken out of, they have to be liberated. Now, what they tried to do was something different. What they tried to do was, while their aim was that, the method they adopted was to try and dethrone the current Ukrainian dispensation in Kiev, try and install a puppet regime. And that is where they went wrong, because while their aim would have been achieved by putting a puppet regime, they were looking at aim plus. They were looking at controlling entire Ukraine. So when they apportionate the force, which was apportionated for that particular operation, they realized that while their strike forces were quite potent, the necessary logistics could not keep pace with it.
No, but let me interject here. Well, Putin declared an aim probably for the outside world to say, I want to liberate Donetsk and Luhansk. Probably his aim was to only take over Kiev and make Ukraine into a puppet nation.
So if he was, I'm sorry, sir, if that was the aim, the force level which he apportionated for that kind
That's
of
the
an
point. No, I agree. That's the point I want you to bring out. That's exactly the point I'm trying to say. If that was the aim, the entire campaign should have been focused on Kiev and not
at Luhansk and Donetsk.
Yeah.
So, and then he started going towards Zaporizhia, towards the south. Then there was an attempt to go to Odisha. So in his mind, his whole thing was cluttered, and his force got dissipated, and that is why he's stuck today the way he's stuck. So here I wanted to bring out one thing, that though the aim possibly was selected correctly, the method of reaching the aim was incorrectly appreciated. Probably he did not appreciate the kind of resistance that might come. At the same time, probably he overestimated the capacities of his armed forces, and possibly was not correctly advised by his military leader. That's why I went to go back to my opening statement where I said those 14 days of repeated meetings, I'm sure the wise people who sat through must have understood each and every implication. And that is why we were able to achieve what we had to achieve on the 6th and 7th. And despite whatever Pakistan did after that, you would have realized that the counter to each of Pakistan's actions were always available with us. And we were quite capable to escalate this Op Sindhu to maybe next 3 levels should the need have arisen. So that is why I take Op Sindhu as positive, possibly I will say a blue method or a white method of principles on principles of war, especially in terms of the first principle, which is selection and maintenance of aim.
Okay, let's apply it here.
So let's come back.
Let me make a statement. You might like it to buttress it or even up. I've always felt that the Americans probably did not have a clear aim, and whatever aim they had, they couldn't maintain it throughout this campaign. And many people have come out in public and said, look, the American objectives were not clear. Well, 1 week into the campaign, it was then Marco Rubio who said, no, these are our objectives. Trump said something, everything. So I thought if America lacked anything in epic fury, it was selection and maintenance of aim. I mean, till the end, I didn't know whether regime change was their idea getting the nuclear enrichment, the nuclear enriched nuclear thing out was their thing. Killing proxies was it. Destroying ballistic missiles. I didn't know what their aim was. Over to you.
So I'll go back to again May of last year when those 12-day campaign happened between. It was 11 days between Iran and Israel, and for a day and a half the Americans had stepped in. And if you look at it, the aim was very clear. They were trying to uh, hit the nuclear capacities, primarily trying to send a signal. Now the problem here was they were doing it while there is a negotiation going along with Qatar negotiating the Iranians to sign, go by the nuclear agreement and go with a new deal with the Americans. That having said, I will examine it in the manner that when the Gaza operations happened in 24 and 25, Israel was always having the threat that if they start looking westwards, Hezbollah and Iran will someday come and bite them. So they could not look on two directions. And if you recollect, that famous pager attack was launched on Hezbollah, which created a huge amount of damage to Hezbollah's capacity, especially their leadership. It was again one of those operations which needs to be flagged as something out of the box thought which came out, analyzed and executed perfectly. And it did create a kind of a leadership crisis inside Hezbollah. And the amount of interference which should have come from Hezbollah towards Israel when the Gaza operations were going on was very minimal. Now, having done that, if you recollect, when Israel tried the same thing of regime change, they were trying the same thing last year in the garb of hitting nuclear sites. They were trying to hit and decapacitate the complete Iranian leadership, possibly with the hope that if the leadership is missing, Iran will capitulate and fall. And Iran indicated that they are quite capable of responding. So those 12 days of action, where for every Israeli attack was promptly responded by a suitable Iranian response. So if somebody had analyzed it correctly, even after the American hits on those 3 nuclear sites, the first response from Iran came was on the American base in Saudi Arabia. So it was a kind of an indication which Iran gave that should I be attacked, these could be my responses. People should have read it, and accordingly they should have understood their capacities and the possibilities of executing a task. What possibly happened this time was they were of the hope that this nuclear thing is not going to happen, and Israel was always looking for decapacitating the radical Islamic regime. There was no, and it's been made very clear by Netanyahu in repeated times that he doesn't want the current regime to be in power. USA also over the last 4.5 decades has been smarting under the problems it faced in the 70s, when they were thrown out of Iran, and the Shah had to be given refuge in the United States, and that kind of treatment is something which the Americans haven't forgotten. So over the years they have been trying to reinstall the Shah. When I was thinking of this today, I could extend it to Afghanistan. If you look at the 70s in Afghanistan and Iran, these were the two places where there was Shah in place. The Islam was very, very moderate. Both these societies were pretty modern compared to the other Arabian influence. In fact, in our younger age, people used to say the Persians and the Arabs are totally two different varieties.
Yeah.
Persians are the moderates, and that's why the Jew population also was prevalent in northern Iran. So if you look at 70s, there was a kind, and possibly the analysis by the think tanks in the United States and Israel was that should this regime be decapacitated, there is a degree of discontentment in Iran. And if we can reinstate a puppet regime and rule Iran by proxy, we would be able to negate all possible threats to Israel. I mentioned it in one of your earlier podcasts that if you look at They have already neutralized Jordan. UAE has already signed the Abraham Accord. Saudi Arabia can be turned to sign the Abraham Accord any day. And Saudi Arabia, in any case, can only provide money. It doesn't have the
Anything
force,
else?
anything else. And Iraq has been taken out. Syria has been taken out. The two possible belligerents who could have affected. Egypt has become silent. So when you look at it, Israel by and large has only one threat left, that was Iran.
Iran.
And if Iran had been taken out and a moderate regime established in Iran, if that is the aim that we are talking about, then that would have been a brilliant operation. It would have been aim plus of what happened in Venezuela. So here they would have possibly been able to achieve much more.
Let's look at it that way. Let's look at it the thing that they wanted to achieve a moderate regime and all that, right? Any case, if that was the aim, they never pursued that aim first, and secondly, they were not what shall I say, equipped for that aim. Not their plans didn't match that aim. The plans which they wanted to carry out didn't match the aim which they were putting. Because even in Venezuela, you needed those boots on ground to do that regime change, even 20, whatever. Even here, a big country like Iran, you needed to put something as your plan. Just by bombarding any country, you don't change the regime. Just by taking the regime out, you don't take this thing. So I felt there was a huge mismatch between whatever they aimed for and whatever they actually planned for.
So there was no doubt about that. Their calculations went wrong. They possibly felt that if they are able to execute the complete hierarchy in one go, there will be a vacuum of leadership on the top. And in that kind of a scenario, when there is huge amount of discontentment which was fed to possibly their intelligence, that there is an uprising which is happening, which will possibly overthrow whatever little bit of for new kind of regime which will come. What they miscalculated was, I've been saying this regularly, that when a nation gets attacked, even the most aggrieved person rallies behind the flag. And that is a miscalculation. I think they got the same thing would have happened in Venezuela also. But what happened in Venezuela was that was a quick in, quick out kind of an operation. They just exited before people realized what happened. They allowed the number two to continue in power. So
There
despite,
was probably a deal with her before that.
so there must have been a deal with her, definitely. Those kind of preparatory actions they did not do in Iraq. Possibly they felt that this, once they execute this operation of 28th of
Someone will
February,
come and they'll put someone in.
not that the Raza Pahlavi's heir who is sitting in America eating kaju badam, and so he's doing nothing there, nothing worthwhile. So possibly what I hear is that there was some indications to say that people want him back. And they also expected the Kurds to possibly assist on the requirement of boots on ground. So they possibly assumed that once the leadership goes, the Kurds will revolt in the north and force the IRGC to look towards the Kurds while they install this gentleman in Tehran. So there was some huge amount of miscalculation as far as the aim is concerned. And thereafter, it just went awry. Totally awry, because they thereafter selected the different aim of denuclearization. Then they started another aim of capturing their oil assets. Kharg Island became another target. Then they started creating a naval blockade. Then they started targeting their resources with international countries, trying to put sanctions and those kind of things. And then, of course, the famous Hormuz Triangle, which they finally landed themselves in. So now, today, their aim has shifted down from regime change to opening of Hormuz. And that is why Iran today is negotiating various forums with a degree of strength, because the Americans never had a proper aim and they just could not maintain their aim throughout. So the first principle of war was totally flouted by the Americans and Israelis, and that is why they are where they are today.
Let's look at the second, third, and the fourth in in a block. Offensive action, concentration of force, and surprise.
So I will take surprise first.
Okay.
take surprise first because that will give out the answer to the other two. So
Okay.
what the Americans did was in the month of January, the focus was totally in Central America. The Armada was all opposite Venezuela.
Yeah.
Build-up was all there. There was some degree of build-up in the Mediterranean, possibly to support the Gaza action. But though they kept boiling on the Iran thing, they kept it at negotiating level. So the Qatar negotiations was continuing, and I believe these two gentlemen, Bitkoff and Kushner, were kept the Iranians engaged to that there is a possibly a solution coming, because Iran also needed a solution because it was finding financial hardships. It needed a little release of the sanctions. It needed an outlet for their oil to go and sell, because in this increased oil market, Iran felt that it being the third largest oil resource, it is not able to get the kind of money buck for the booty which is got. So they were also playing along. So surprise in my mind was perfect. The way they built up their forces, both in Israel and in the Gulf, and the way they brought their naval presence into the region, and the way they executed the operation on February 28th, the surprise was perfect. And if you look at it accordingly, the concentration of force was good, because the kind of force they were looking at to execute the task on 28th February was what was created over there. So there was a huge, I don't know, I had a map earlier, I don't know, maybe someday I'll
That's okay.
share. There was a huge concentration of air assets, and somebody quantified the air assets was nearly at a ratio of almost 50:1 when you look at the very bare minimum air force which Iran had. They had a fantastic analysis of all static targets, so which they wanted to engage. So it was not just the decapacitation of the hierarchy. They also expanded that to reducing Iran's capability to respond, because they knew that having done that, there will be an Iranian response, and the Iranian response they analyzed would be towards American bases and Israel. So all these missile launch sites were all taken out. Iranian Navy, whatever little bit they had, that was targeted. That famous ship which was going back from India, if you recollect, was sunk off the Maldivian coast.
Yeah.
So if you look at the concentration of force, surprise, and offensive action, for the first 8-10 days, it was based on possibly whatever aim they selected then. And the only thing which was missing, like you said, was there was no feasibility to put boots on ground. I think Trump is very hesitant in putting boots on ground, and that is possibly the reason why. And Israel does not believe in putting boots on ground, and it was too far away to put boots on ground, and therefore that is where the whole thing turned. And the second thing, they were not calculating correctly what will be the Iranian response. So I will like to add before I hand it.
Let's talk of surprise, concentration of force, and offensive action from in the Iranian point of view, even their selection and maintenance of aim.
So the Iranians, they after May 2025 analyzed, and they were aware that their leadership will be a target. So one thing they did, and you have been mentioning it in many podcasts, their aim was to fight dispersed, which meant that they decentralized command, and they gave assets to the provincial leaders of the IRGCs, along with control and command, to engage the targets that could be engaged from that particular asset that they had. So this had been worked out beautifully by the Iranians, and so their aim was very clear that if there is a strike on Iran, their response will be the way they responded, which will be to create a kind of a scenario where clear victory cannot be achieved by any major nation, because they were aware that somewhere down the line the next volley of Israel-US operations are going to happen. So their aim was, to my knowledge, and they have maintained it. So whichever way it is, by dispersing their assets, protecting their assets, not exposing them to, or creating dummies which the which with the Americans possibly engaged. So there was a count at some time in the first 5 days that 60% of their launchers had been, destroyed. And subsequently, it came out that only about 15-20% of launchers are destroyed, 80% are still intact. So there was some mismatch in the way the Americans achieved their aims and the way Iranians managed to protect their assets, despite having capability to respond. And that was coming out very loud and clear. And that's where surprise, concentration of force, and offensive action can be combined. The way Iranians responded was not correctly appreciated by either Americans or the Israelis. They felt that their Iron Dome is strong enough to take care of all rocket attacks. They had never calculated for MIRVs.
Yeah, but that's a little off this thing because their Iron Dome, everything failed in the last campaign also.
But it didn't fail the way it failed this time. So last campaign, what happened was it failed in areas which did not have assets. If you recollect, all the places where their Iranian rockets actually landed, they were not value assets for Israel. All their value assets had managed to keep because they were not, Iran was not firing MIRVs that time. So they were looking at simple ballistic rockets coming from Iran, and they had assigned and also their possibly their assets were also depleted, both the Israeli as well as the
The
Americans.
American.
So American never thought that Iran will expand the operations into Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and the UAE beyond Saudi
So
Arabia.
that so the Iranians have achieved a huge amount of surprise by this horizontal escalation.
Also concentration of force. So when you look at concentration of force, it doesn't have to be at one place. You can achieve concentration of force by being deployed dispersed also. So what Iranians did was disperse themselves and achieve concentration of force that they targeted, and thereby setting the Americans back. And their complete air defense, or the so-called Iron Dome, was completely shattered. And thereafter, the second, third volleys became huge, and that caused huge amount of damage both in Israel and all the American bases, and also in these Gulf states which were harboring Americans. Kuwait and UAE are the ones which suffered the most. So to that extent, I will put the Iranians on a very high pedestal in all these first four principles of war.
Yeah. So let's look at the other gravitate to the thing. Let's look at security because I thought was an important thing, which Iranians achieved a lot of security of their force, which what they had. And let me put it across the way I think. See, Iranians are very clear that the way their security was about how to hide what they had, and and they hid, whether in mountains, wherever it is, and they never let anyone know what they had. One, and they were prepared. They didn't have a bone of defense at all. They were not prepared to defend themselves. They knew on the first day that their defenses will go, and hence they went on a business of securing what they had and then going completely offensive, right? And that kind of a security, which I thought the Americans didn't have, or the Israelis also, the American Israeli force didn't have that kind of security, because after the initial surprise, it was very clear that how USA was going about. And it was also clear that USA was quite exposed in those bases in the Middle East. And the photographs of those bases suggested to me that they had not taken any measure to secure them. They were like on a parade on a tarmac. They could have easily these bases have been in existence for a long time. They could have been dispersed at the bases, and if at best maybe a aircraft gets hit and that's it, and another some minor damage or something. We all know what we're talking of, right? They could have built underground shelters and everything. I thought the US guys, the US Army as a whole, the US forces as a whole, didn't take this too seriously, their own security. Whereas Iranians, till now, we don't know where all underground they have dug and they have hidden their ammunition, rockets, and their launchers. Your views on security, because I think that it needs to be understood that tomorrow, in an exchange between India, Pakistan, or India, China, security of assets will become a very important aspect.
So I will counter you by saying that Iranians also faltered in security. The
Yeah,
fact
some
that they knew that the leadership is under target, for the entire leadership to assemble in one under one roof, gave a kind of an opportunity target to start this operation in the first
that I
place.
grant, that I
So
grant, that I
is what
completely grant you.
had they not done that, had they not done that, and I'll put it this way: had Mujtaba Khamenei also died in that, he was also present. I believe he came out alive, and I don't know how much of people still don't know how much injured he is and what is his current status. Some people say he's lost his legs. Some people say he's invalidated. A lot of things are there. People haven't seen him physically, in places. Um, so, if you are worried that your entire leadership is under target, would you assemble the way they assembled on 28th of February? And it may not have been the first time, because they would have done this in the past, which would have been observed by Mossad and CIA, which operates inside Iran. Mossad operates multiple teams inside Iran. So it is under observation. So that aspect of security is something which Iranians floundered. Subsequently, what has happened is a fallout of the earlier costs of their aim. When you are fighting dispersed, when you have suballocated assets, the consequential targets for the other guy increases. Let's say you have one squadron of assault aircraft and you put them in one base, then that complete squadron can be taken out by one wave of attack on the base. But if you relocate them into 5 bases, then you will require 5 different strikes to be able to achieve the same thing. It's a very simple thing of spreading your assets, and
Yeah,
it is very
dispersion.
much dispersion is very much applicable to us. Even in our scenario, in our forward airfields, we don't concentrate our aircrafts. The aircrafts come there for a temporary period of time, launch their operations, and are recovered somewhere in the
Yeah,
hinterland.
yeah, yeah. I mean, look, let's look at our basic deployment drills, which we've all learned from, that no two guns will be in one line. That's our
Fine.
basic way of deployment, isn't it?
So
That,
especially in today's world, when there's a threat of long-range vectors, drones, precision weapons, the basic structure is not to concentrate your forces. So in that count, all their bases, and none of these bases are, surprise things. They are all marked on Google Map. You don't have to have, any kind of surveillance required, because they are. In fact, you can even, if you have a good satellite, you can even picture that sentry who's standing on the gate.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
sure the Chinese in this case have provided
Would have given
a
them real live feed.
live feed of the assets. That's a given. Both China and Russia have cooperated in that count to give them the kind of intelligence and possibly even guided them in the manner in which they have responded, because it's the first time they have responded in this unique manner. And possibly last 12 months they were preparing for it. It's worthwhile, doing some analysis to see what kind of training and rehearsals Iranians IRGC undertook since May last year till February of this year. I'm sure somebody will do it, and it will come out loud and clear that the IRGC must have rehearsed this response multiple times, because it came out like a concert and like an orchestra where every organ played in the manner it was supposed to play. And that was the biggest surprise for the United States, because they were not expecting that kind of response. Even Israel was taken off guard, because they were also not able to respond in that. So to that extent, I think security and surprise go together. Iranians, in some manner, they were able to maintain security of their assets post 28th of February. So there are two sides to it. As far as
Yeah,
maintenance of morale and flexibility, I'll take them together.
go
When
ahead.
you when you look at a country whose head has been chopped off, logically speaking, such an army collapses.
Collapse.
It should collapse. Logically speaking, it should collapse. For the fact that the Iranians managed to hold their own indicates that they were prepared for this kind of a scenario. And they had carried out alternate methodology of conduct of operations should such a scenario happen. And that is why I keep saying that we need to look at the way they have trained. The morale of the country, actually, what was expected was there was um, lot of unrest in the country. That was what was painted. 30,000-40,000 people had been killed. People were getting lashed for not wearing a hijab. There was a lot of campaigns going around where there was a degree of mistrust in the regime. So they were looking that once the head gets cut, the morale of this complete armed force will collapse, and they will possibly surrender. If if one could look at it normally, that would have what would have happened. You know, जब सेनापति को मार देते हो तो सेना का कोई वो नहीं रहता. So that goes by the basic logic, and that was a miscalculation because unless, on one side we are looking at morale being shattered. What happened in Iran has been the reverse. Not only the army, the public also rallied behind the government. Those who were so-called oppressed, they also rallied behind the flag.
Yeah,
And that was
not only that, it is not only public in Iran, public outside also. See,
so,
Khamenei was some kind of a, what shall I say, God's representative on earth for the Shias.
Pope for Shias. Was a Pope for Shias. I can recollect with you, sir. We have a little grocery shop in our shopping center here. And the lady, when we went to wish her Eid, she said, we are not celebrating Eid because our leader has been killed by the Americans. So she doesn't even know who he is, but for her, that guy, and one could see the picture of him in their this thing. So it is not just the Shia population in Iran. It was a worldwide.
Worldwide kind of a phenomenon.
Again, miscalculation, bad planning by Mossad and CIA. The best thing would have been to capture him alive like Maduro and take him out. You know, take him out and put your guy in. That would have been the best part. The way Ayatollah stayed in exile for a very large period of years, I think 15, 20 years before he came back. It would have been a clean exchange. Possibly the morale would have been different. I will not say low, but then it could have been different.
Yeah, but then that would have meant a different kind of an aim, different kind of an operation, different kind of.
First point, if your aim was wrong, everything goes wrong subsequently.
Everything goes wrong, right? Okay, let's move ahead and say, okay, let's look at. I thought the Iranians were far more flexible in the way they approached the whole story, right? And beyond the point, I thought the American campaign became too rigid. They were doing the same thing over and over and again. Whereas the Iranians were flexible enough that, look, we've lost all this, so let's do something else. And they started, approaching the whole thing differently. How about the last three: cooperation, economy of effort, and administration?
So before that, one point on flexibility. If the kind of targets that you are looking for is not existing, what do you do? And that was the problem with the Americans faced, that they were absolutely rigid in the way they were conducting the campaign. They were looking for, aircrafts. They were looking for naval ships. They were looking for missile dumps. They were looking for logistics areas, which is standard targeting. We all do it in our scenario when you carry out joint targeting lists. They say we'll bomb all the bridges, we'll cut off their lines of communication, etc., etc. And they concentrated all their air force effort was going on to those lines. But none of them affected them because Iranians were fighting decentralized, which meant they were not, a particular force was not dependent on the neighboring force in any way. They were all self-sufficient. So therefore, Iranians, by carrying out dispersion, managed to achieve flexibility, whereas the Americans, because they were fighting concentrated, they could not shift. and they were not able to relate themselves to the kind of warfare that was thrown on them, which was the Shaheed drones, multiple of them coming to them. It took them almost 20 to 25 days to finally realize that these are the areas which needs to be taken care of, rather than going and carrying out tons and tons, dropping tons and tons of explosives into wilderness. You have to find a toad for the shaheeds which come on top of your head.
Hey,
It
it's
was
not only it's not only that kind of warfare. The way the Iranians closed the Strait of Hormuz and they had the flexibility, and they opened out a nuclear option, and which there was no answer by
so
the US
there was
people.
there was this wonderful strike which was played down, but then Americans learned. There was one long range vector which went and struck Diego Garcia, 4,000 miles. And that actually created a lot of furor inside the American camp, because they realized that they are not outside that arc, that famous Fateh arc, which our friend was showing on the on the map. The Iranians managed to pull out. I don't know whether it was a missile which was homegrown or which was provided to them. These are things which will come out much later. But the fact that they were able to target at such long distances and accurately, to have MIRVs which could have tomorrow, if an MIRV is loaded with a nuclear weapon, then you are looking at six, and all that is good enough to take care of entire Israel. So all of them would have created a kind of thought process inside the Americans, that if these guys tomorrow get hold of 10 nuclear bombs, there will be somebody who cannot be thereafter schooled, and they will become a rogue nation like North Korea is today. So that is why the whole aim shifted from leadership train to denuclearization, because they have the vectors, if they have the warheads and they are able to mate it, then they become a nuisance value to the entire region. So that's where they were. And the Strait of Hormuz was a reverse. The Americans never thought that Strait of Hormuz will become a kind of muddy waters that they have got
No, it was.
themselves in.
I mean, look, in the course of this campaign, the Iranians were flexible enough to acquire a new nuclear option,
Yeah.
and just they boxed the Americans in. And I thought that was a real, what shall I say, game changer in the whole story. The way they did it, and again, probably they had this option up their sleeve, planned for it, because the force levels required and the I wouldn't say the force levels, the planning and the forces required to close the Strait of Hormuz, they had it in place, irrespective of what everything else went, and they kept it simple. They kept it simple with those fast patrol boats and a few drones they could close. And I think this is a great lesson even
The
for us in the
first thing they did was mine. So they mined
yeah
the waterway, which is where the Americans blundered. If you recollect, we did an analysis on boots on ground when this boxer was moving
yeah.
from Japan. Remember, it was, I think, the month of April, mid-April, somewhere we had done
I
this.
said get hold of those islands.
Exactly. So had the Americans been bold enough and taken some kind of a proactive stage and to put some
This would
kind of
have
resource down, it would have definitely made closing of the state that much difficult. Once they had closed the states, there was no moving into the states. So thereafter, the Americans possibly were just pushed away, whatever naval armada they had, and they realized all their CTFs and all became useless here, because they were not able to carry out any kind of coercive action which they are designed for, and because they couldn't enter the states. And despite having the complete southern coastline of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, up Bahrain, up to UAE, up to Oman, complete was with the Americans. They could not expand that growth across the Persian Gulf, and that is where capabilities of force which was chosen for this operation was incorrect.
that
Because
gets back to the first one, selection and maintenance of aim. Okay, right. Uh, let's talk a little of administration because and why I'll tell you. Look, towards the end of the campaign, one kept hearing got information and reports that the Americans were running low on stockpiles of their, missiles, and hence probably they pulled out of this whole story. We don't know, but credible. Whereas on the other side, you see the Iranians were well stocked administratively. That's the whole story of administration and logistics. And they were not only administratively balanced in terms of ammunition, they were also balanced in terms of the way they went about doing the day-to-day business for the entire 60 days or 70 days of this operation. Decentralized. They decentralized their it's not only decentralization of leadership. I thought they decentralized the way they went about doing their logistics and administration also very well. When they were all independent and self-contained, and this comes only through good planning. And I think that's a very important principle of war which comes out. Right? They were prepared. They were anticipatory in the fact that look, they knew that where they were going to get hit, where they were going to become weak, and if they were to become weak, how they would have to survive and administer themselves. Yeah, your views on this?
It's a little controversial point which I'm starting with. A naval blockade cannot close movement. So whatever amount of force you put, and that has come out loud and clear in this particular event. They have been striking on some seafarers which were trying to take out oil, but they haven't been able to dry out Iran. Iran doesn't produce that kind of food themselves, so the food grains, etc., continues to flow into Iran. They forgot that they have a northern boundary also. They forgot that there are countries like Turkmenistan, Tajikistan,
The
which
Caspian
have
route.
exactly. So and there was no blockade there. There were some aerial attempts to create some kind of this thing, but beyond that they could not stop. So Iran did not dry itself out. Somebody said if they capture Kharg Island, their oil flow will go out because the entire storage capacity is lying in Kharg Island. Despite, and I believe in every American war game in the war college, Kharg Island happens to be, captured within the first week of operations in the Persian Gulf. And I think there was a instructor of one of the war college in one of these podcasts I heard him. He said, I'm surprised that despite teaching them to so many admirals and generals who are participating in this war, they haven't touched Kharg Island till date because that was something which was called center of gravity for Iran. They were worried again because the top man didn't want boots on ground. You can't capture any asset without putting boots on ground. If they had put boots on ground on Qasim Island and all those areas around the
You would
Hormuz,
have taken it.
they would have taken it and they would have been able to prevent this closure of Hormuz. And again, closure of Hormuz is played up by the Red Land in any American war game in a Persian Gulf operation. So these two things came out loud and clear as to why the Americans did not appreciate these two things happening. And till the time Kharg Island and Qasim Island continues to be with Iran, it continues to control the waterways. And the third issue is the nations which are around it, let's say Oman, UAE, etc. They are worried that if the Americans don't finish the job the way they have done this time,
Yeah.
they are going to go away without completing the job. Thereafter, their existence in that region will become very, very difficult
No, it's
because
going to become difficult. I mean, we
that,
have any doubt with this
that
current
is why,
negotiation? It will be difficult.
that is why Qatar has jumped in out of nowhere and now trying to, orchestrate this MOU because it knows that if this MOU is not executed properly and if a favorable condition is not developed in Iran, Saudi Arabia might survive because it's got the Red Sea on the other side. But for Qatar, Bahrain, UAE, and Oman to some extent, their life is going to be miserable.
Yeah.
So, and Americans are not going to stay there for long. They'll leave once this MOU gets operationalized. They will thin out, and that's why the operations haven't been conducted in the manner in which the aim has been set out. Like I said, the aim was just, if I look at it, go back to my first point, it was unthought of or unplanned aim that somebody came and told the people who are at the plants that, Eureka, you have this, box of honey or a bottle of honey lying inside this room, go have it, not realizing that the bees were all around it. So when they went for honey, the bees came and bit them. So they were stung by the bees and now they are stuck. They don't want to know how to extricate from that room. So very another example could be cheese inside a rat trap. So what they went for and how they got stuck into it is very evident. The way they are now trying to struggle to get out of this with their heads high, because and that's why yesterday I think we talked, in this current 6 to 8 months we have seen two superpowers struggling, and shows that the world is not unipolar anyway. All small powers are quite capable of holding on to themselves and their own interests. So let's hope this deal comes through and this whole muddle gets cleared, because it's got
No, I
implications
don't
for the
think it
world.
will get cleared because the muddle is there for us, right? Because Iran has still got its tail up and it's got this thing up. So let us see how it goes. But well, we've spent nearly 1 hour discussing.
I have one outside remark. Uh, Mustafa Khomeini is the last man standing of the old regime. Whether he whether he's alive or he's in
We
whatever
don't
state
know.
it is, we don't know.
We don't
If
know.
he goes, if he goes, then this guy Arachi, Galibaf, and all these clowns who are Peshchigan, whoever is the president, they are not of the same variety of the kind of leadership they had earlier. And I don't see a third rung of leadership currently available in Iran to, ride this. So that's why I said if Mustafa had also died in that same operation,
Then the
possibly
whole
things would
story would have been different.
have.
Look, even that what you're saying, Iran, might still degenerate into something else because it's too early to talk that Iran has won the war. I mean, I'm not of that variety to say Iran has won the war and it will live happily ever after. It might not happen. Iran has had some military success. Whether it will convert that military success into peace and stability and all that is still up for grabs. And for whatever is to happen to Iran, they don't need USA to do it or Israel to do it or others. They will do it themselves. Because it's an unstable country at this point of time, and people are not happy. And at some point of time, every 2 years, 3 years, people come on the streets in that country. And this time, I will
It'll come back.
it'll come back. It'll come back to haunt them. So we'll leave it at that. We'll see. Because and here yesterday and day before also I've heard ideas. Oh, they know these chaps know how to handle them and all that. But well, these are things we'll take it. So if you have
Let
all
we also
this,
let's also understand the IRGC is not so homogeneous as it was on 28th of February. They have taken losses.
yeah, they've taken
So
losses. So we don't know.
we
Look,
don't know
we
how.
don't know. I'll put it this way: there are a lot of unknowns in Iran. Let them come out, and when they come out, how they'll play out is something we'll have to see.
The fact that they could not capture two pilots who were inside Iran for
Yeah, we
48 hours.
discussed that. We
That's
discussed
it.
that. Yeah, we discussed that. Yes, they're not that successful. Okay, can we take some questions? Right? Yeah, the first question, General Sir, can you request next week? Can you break down the difference between in war theory between Sun Tzu, Machiavelli, Clausewitz, and Germany? They
230 theoretic.
they'll become too theoretic, Harsh. And fundamentally, all these chaps say the same thing. There's nothing different.
They're on Wikipedia. I'm sure they can read it.
Though both in Iran and US trying to be principle of war without any principle or objectives, both badly wanted the war, it seems. No, I don't think badly wanted the war. Uh, Even
And
within USA, there was a element which said they didn't want the war. I mean, well, I'll leave it at that. I don't think we'll take this further. Right. Apologies for asking a silly question. I read that the rate of fire is limited by heat and barrel fatigue. Can you cool down the barrel by firing dummy shells filled with compressed CO2 or N2? Yeah, you have used this is barrel heating. You
barrel
don't have to do
cowling, I don't think so. There are methods to make good the ammunition, so we don't get too much carried away by heating of barrels, because there are procedures by which we ensure that the rate of fire doesn't get affected by that. There are drills and procedures available in all weapons. And in prolonged wars, when we are looking at it, extended areas and firing, there are methods by which we ensure that the rate of fire is maintained by ensuring enough time is given to barrels to cool down. So there is some kind of alternations that we do. I will not get into the technicalities here, but please be
Yeah,
little.
it's a very simple thing. Yeah, I must tell you, if the rate of fire is high demanded, you rest one gun. You don't fire one gun. That's all. Simple. You give that chap 10 minutes rest so that the battle cools down. So there are methods, very simple methods. You don't have to get into technical this thing. The original objective of Putin was not to let Ukraine be part of NATO. That still remains in a limbo. Yeah, it's in a limbo that we discussed earlier. That was not a thing. I mean, go with that. I always said that army is the most prestigious army in the war. We fought and won 4 wars during Cold War and recovered quickly from that situation, whereas many other countries were ruined. Your views?
Our army knows what it has to do. That is the best part of it. Our operations are very closely rehearsed and planned, and we ensure that we don't extend our envelopes beyond a particular means. And therefore, when we select any kind of aim, we achieve it. What we did in Kargil is one other example. The aim was very clear that we want to take back our posts, and we will not extend the war beyond Kargil. So there were some people who said why India did not expand the operations into the plains and the desert sector when there was an opportunity. The aim of the nation was very clear that we will like to get back the land which was illegally occupied by Pakistan. And we understood that, applied ourselves, the army focused itself on the job at hand, achieved it, and we won the war. If we had
Yep.
carried out operation across the complete border, for all you know, we may not have had the kind of victory that we achieved in Kargil. So we are an army which understands how to go about our aims and how to carry out force allocation based on the aims.
Right. The US Department of War defined the mission as a focused effort to destroy Iranian offensive missile, neutralize their production facilities, and disable security infrastructure. Ashish, why I took your question is because the kind of objectives which is there is exactly the wrong way to go about doing things. Your view?
Absolutely. It is like destroying complete Iran. So for that, you will require a kind of force levels and time which is much more than what the
Much
Americans
more than
applied
what
here,
was planned.
was planned. So I don't think that these were their objectives anyway. They were subsequent objectives, because when they failed to achieve their aim, they started looking at sub alternate aims or subsidiary aims, and that is why all this came. Production facilities. How do you know where the production facilities are? How many production facilities are? And everything can't be destroyed by air. You have to physically carry out destruction on ground. They did not commit any force on ground till date. Even yesterday, President Trump said, "I will destroy or bomb the Iran out of the map of the world." It is not possible unless you launch a nuclear strike, which will not be permitted in this kind of a scenario. So this is exactly why this whole discussion happened, that they were changing their aims to suit their operations. And every time they changed their aim, they realized that their operation wasn't achieving it. And therefore, they kept proceeding to the next levels.
Okay. Akash says, sir, if economic domination was American objective, then they may have timed it wrong. The financial markets were already overvalued and needed a correction. With the present American war actions, the financial markets are already at reasonable discounts. Given the stalemate and trends thereof, markets may be headed into deep discount territories. Your views? I really don't understand this. Yeah, anything you have to say, Hari?
So when I plan a war of 48 hours, and I think that everything will be over in 48 hours, I will end up getting the complete Iranian oil which is available. I will put a regime which is favorable to me. I will be able to exploit the rare earth and other resources which are present in Iran. If that is the way I set out aim for myself and apply myself, I did not plan for a financial
Yeah,
market
all
problem.
this.
So
Yeah, yeah.
these are all things which came about because of
Later on.
later on, because they were not planned the names correctly. That's why I say let's go back to a figure. If the 28 strike had been perfect, the complete Iranian hierarchy had been killed, and Reza Pahlavi had been put on the throne on, let's say, 4th or 5th of March. Today, possibly Trump may have been seen in Tehran going on a motorcade, waving around to Iranian public, and the whole game plan would have been different. You would have been saying, "Look at him; he has taken the financial markets to new levels." For all you know, Sensex, the Nifty might have crossed 30,000 by now. So there is a other side to everything. So you can't see only one side of the story.
Yeah, looking at the recent revelation of Ukraine and Pak collaboration on drone technology, what are our next political and tactical measures going to be?
Drone technology, we should not get too worried about. Drone is an irritant. Drone is like a mosquito. Let it be there; it will come. You can't say that I will be able to take out drones. Drones will be there, and I'm sure, I'm aware also, not sure, that we are taking suitable measures to ensure that it doesn't affect our operations in any manner. That
Not
having
only
said,
that, we are working on, it's not it's a trend line. A drone is a new animal on the battlefield. So the counter drone systems is the newer animal which will just follow. So I don't think, yeah.
I was coming to that only when COVID struck. For the first 4 or 5 months, we didn't know what to do. Then we developed a vaccine. And once the vaccine was developed, COVID was eradicated. Nobody talks
Well,
about
same
COVID.
thing will happen with drones.
Same thing will happen with drones. So let's not get worried about. As far as Ukraine-Pak collaboration, it's not a new thing. The T-80 tanks, which the Pakistanis use, and they are the
Are
most
all
modern, incidentally, most modern 1980 vintage tanks. Uh, they are all Ukraine-based. They are a lower version of T-72 tanks, which Ukraine used to manufacture in the Soviet era. And that's what it's nothing new. Pakistan has always been supplying or being supplied by Ukraine in terms of ammunition and weaponry, and it will continue.
okay. Unlike the Americans, the Israelis have a clear objective in mind. They know once Iran is dealt with, the next step is to out Turkey from NATO and neutralize it as well. Pak and Q views. यार ये पहले ईरान के साथ तो निपट लो बाकी
पहले पहले Hezbollah से निपट लो. Iran is far away. So, but then the bigger problem is Hezbollah today,
yeah.
and resurrection of the Hamas in Gaza. Because while they are looking at Iran in the last 6 months,
वहां शुरू हो जाएगा.
the Hamas has got recreated inside Gaza.
Okay, dear generals, do we have or need to have massive underground facilities to protect our critical war fighting assets and also protect civilian lives like London Underground or other Western subway?
1.5 billion people, you
You
can't
can't hide
create
them.
and hide all of them. So please look at London, population of UK and population of India. That is first. Secondly, you have strategic depth. When you have a large country, you won't find these kind of facilities in America because it's a huge country and doesn't have a direct threat. So same is the case with the Soviet Russia. They do have some kind of protection against nuclear weapons, but then no, conventional weapons, no. So to that extent, yes, but please go to our border villages right across the line of control. Every border village has these kind of facilities where the civilian public, whenever there is a threat or shelling, they are assimilated in these protected areas, much like what happens in Israel. So those kind of facilities are there where it is required. As far as our other assets are concerned, let's be very assured that all our assets are well protected. And it was very clear in Op Sindhu when all those fortes could not reach anywhere, and all our assets managed to survive whatever Pakistan threw at us.
Okay. Given the list of 10 principles of war, the Iranians put up a far better show on all of them when compared with Americans and war assets at their disposal. Your views?
Absolutely. That's what happens when you go with overconfidence and you underestimate the
The
opponent.
enemy.
It is like a boxer, a very, very strong boxer, gets into the ring assuming that he'll get a knockout in the first round, and he goes all out and gets and loses by points in the 14th round. So that is the best example I can relate this to.
Yeah, the last podcast of Munira Mystery was good. I think that the problem with these Islamic nations that they are not interested in welfare, development, economy. They are messed up with ideology. This is, with regard to today morning's podcast I had done. Look, thank you for that. But let me tell you, not all Muslim nations are the variety that they don't look after their people. Look at Indonesia. They're very careful about their people. It's a democratic country, right?
Malaysia.
Malaysia. So don't generalize to say that all Muslim nations don't look after their people. Okay, that's not. Look at UAE. It might not be a democracy, but they look after the people in that thing. And the
Kuwait,
same goes with Kuwait.
Kuwait, beautiful country.
Look, even Iraq when Saddam Hussein was there. I remember one of my postmates had gone to Iraq, and he told me the kind of facilities which the Iraqis had and which were extended to Indians then in the tenure was phenomenal. The West painted Saddam Hussein as a whatever he was, but the fact that he looked after his people was beyond doubt. He might have been ruthless in the way he ruled and all that, but he looked after his people. Let's not have any doubt about that.
So to that extent, I think people will even rate Indira Gandhi as a tyrannical leader, because a strong leader will always have some degree of
Yeah, yeah.
shades of gray. So let's not and I'll also recommend people not to get carried away with what they read on social media, because large amount of uh, matter is put out to convey different meanings.
Look, there are political ideologies which are coming out. They've got political leanings. They've got ideological leanings and all that. Don't go by that. You also have to understand at that point of time what the government did was as per the situation at that point of time, Indian situation at that point of time. Okay, I mean, let me give it. People curse Nehru, Mr. Nehru, left, right, and center for everything. But is that correct? You look at what I mean. You hear Pakistani commentators. They said, "Look, a guy like Nehru could make IITs. He could invest in industry. He could build dams. He could build everything. The very things which people curse Mr. Nehru is appreciated by your country next door, which is going around with a begging bowl. Okay, if we wouldn't have had these IITs, but for him, right? So there's a lot of narratives which are flowing out today, and don't transpose yourself to. I mean, you have to understand that generation and the conditions under which we got our independence. Okay, we had nothing when we got our independence. The Britishers just one day left and went off, and overnight you have a young country which had to face the bloodshed of partition. Immediately a war within the same year with in Pakistan, and you had famines going left, right, and center. You had something happening and the partition was not only one sided; it was both sides. Then you had to consolidate the country through by getting hold of all these kings who were wanting to be on their own. So a lot of things were happening. So if you see that, it was a very difficult time for them, for the prime minister and the deputy prime minister of that time. Any views of yours on this?
Agreed, sir. I start by a simple thing like a currency. You started with a currency which wasn't there. You didn't have a constitution. You took for 3 years. You had a constitution which is considered one of the best constitutions in the world. So there are some very, very positive outcomes which has happened in this nation. Please don't compare a prime minister of 75 after who's sitting in the chair at 75 years after creation of a country with somebody who was at the formative years. They can't. They are two different.
Two different stories, completely two different stories.
Even
Okay,
I will put it at this thing. What we were in the 70s, we were a 25-year-old nation. who had fought 3 wars. So don't underestimate Indira Gandhi and her leadership also, because she has also contributed hugely in our development today.